Question 1. I call on the Honourable Member for Arbory Castle, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Chief Minister what improvements have been made in the last 6 months to the entrances and exits at the ports.
Call the Chief Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, over the last 6 months, the Department of Infrastructure has removed the vaccination hub from the airport and replaced the external fire doors. At the sea terminal, there has been replacement of signage and vinyl, decoration and partitioning works at the Welcome Centre, a phased replacement of the chair tops and refurbishment of one of the lift cars to the elevator walkway. Additionally, significant work has been undertaken in and around the harbours in Peel, Ramsey, Laxey, Douglas, Port St Mary, Port Erin and Castletown. These works include, but are not limited to, the replacement of lampposts, render repairs, painting, the refurbishment of railings, the installation of new ladders and ground chains and the deployment of visitor moorings.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Chief Minister, for that update. With regard to the appearance of the sea terminal, is there an existing cleaning policy and cleaning contract in place for the area immediately outside the sea terminal? And will an improved cleaning regime be put in place ahead of this year's TT?
Chief Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, in terms of specific contracts, I'm not clear on that point, but I will give that information to the Honourable Member. But I suspect it is part of general cleaning works that are undertaken, as they would be in other street areas across the town of Douglas. But there is a lot of work planned, Mr Speaker. Upcoming works, including the refurbishment of the international and arrivals area at the sea terminal building, is due. The decoration of the Victoria Pier is due. The installation of new flooring into the Victoria Pier, the replacement of flooring in the elevated walkway, decoration to the sea terminal's corridors, alterations to the departure security area, and upgrade to the sea terminal's access route for passengers. The department is working, Mr Speaker, to ensure that the arrivals points at the sea terminal and indeed the airport are up to scratch, and that process is an ongoing one, and we're going to continue to get to a point where we can all be proud of our arrivals point onto the island.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Hopefully that can be pushed forward quickly. The arrivals area, both at the airport and the sea terminal, is disappointing. Given your new role in the Department of Enterprise, will you be identifying appropriate actions and implementation strategies with the visitor agency in the coming days on how to create a wow factor at the sea terminal and the airport? It's late in the day, but not too late. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know the member who's been leading the visit agency, the Honourable Mr Callison, my good friend, has really fought hard over recent months and indeed years to ensure that we are upgrading our facilities and that we are looking for the wow factor, and I've every confidence he's going to continue to do so.
Final supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Chief Minister. Following the recently released video on the general port upkeep of the island, have any changes been implemented, even at the most basic of levels? Thank you.
In respect to the ports, Chief Minister.
I think there's a very generic video, Mr Speaker, involved actually quite a focus on a number of areas, and I know the Department of Infrastructure is working hard to ensure that its maintenance programme is up to scratch.
Question 2. Again, call the Honourable Member for Arbory Castle, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Environment, Food and Agriculture what the legal position is with regard to charging for single-use plastic bags, and what happens to the money and how this is monitored. Thank you.
The Minister for Environment, Food and Agriculture to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As previously reported in 2018, plastic bag charges are raised, collected and disbursed by retailers under their own schemes. It's not a statutory matter, so there is no requirement to report figures to government, nor is there any cost to government in running these beneficial schemes, which both reduce plastic use and provide community benefits. However, we do propose to bring in regulations under the Climate Change Act, which will restrict the sale, distribution and supply of a number of single-use plastic items, including single-use plastic carrier bags. There will be exclusions for matters such as unwrapped food, seeds, meat and aquatic animals, and for rolls of bin bags. Bags designed for multiple use would also be excluded. The matter of charging for single-use plastic bags would therefore no longer be relevant.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. That's a really interesting and exciting update. The Tesco website suggests 80 local projects have been supported and the co-op promotes this work. Is there any any other public source which highlights what's happening to this money? As part of the previous questioning, I asked if an annual update could be included in the department's website about where the money goes and has gone. Presumably this will continue for quite a while yet. The information might not be there, but I can't find it. Can the Minister direct me to the right area, please? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you. My apologies that updates have not been put on the department website in this regard. However, given the amount of officer time needed to contact each company individually, it didn't seem a good use of officer time. I would encourage the Honourable Member to push for local businesses to celebrate the work and investment that their plastic bag charges bring to our local communities, with Tesco and Co-op being two such companies as talked of by my honourable colleague, and others such as Marks and Spencer also being leading lights in this regard.
The supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to the removal of single-use plastic bags, has the Minister got a timetable in mind for when that will actually be implemented? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you. Yes, there were some final bits of clarity that we've been working on between officers, and then that will be presented again to Council of Ministers with further details. So I'm hoping that will be around October with a lead-in time that may well still bring us a little bit ahead of our neighbouring jurisdictions in terms of their announcements.
Final supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Good luck with that. In terms of the previous answer for the previous Minister, reference was made to the negotiations and discussions with the retailers. You made clear in your earlier answer that that was a troublesome and difficult process. In terms of that awareness of what happens to the actual money that is raised by the retailers, you suggest we speak to the retailers individually. There's no other way to get that information, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you. The challenge is around the time spent contacting each individual retailer as opposed to them being able to compile the information. Certainly, some of those retailers do put information. Some have certainly moved to a more local-based use of that money. Marks and Spencer's, I think I would cite as one of those examples where initially their policy was wider than just the Isle of Man, but actually they have always spent that money on the Isle of Man on a number of really positive projects. So whether a retailer chooses to put that information out into the public domain, I think is ultimately a choice for the retailer. And as people move, a number of these retailers have already moved away from single-use carrier bags, so the charge that they levy is no longer statutory even in the United Kingdom. Therefore, it is entirely their choice as to how they spend that money and equally how they advertise that.
Question 3. And I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mrs Maltby.
Remind Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care what consideration has been given to providing FFP3 standard face masks to healthcare workers in healthcare settings.
On the Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Manx Care follow the United Kingdom Health Security Agency, that's the UKHSA, guidelines. FFP3 masks are in stock and are available to all clinical staff in Manx Care for use where indicated in the UKHSA guidance.
Okay, we turn to question 4. I call on the Honourable Member for Arbory Castletown-Maloo, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what the total cost of training bus drivers is, how many were trained in each of the last 5 years, and how many of these are still working for bus vanning? Thank you.
On the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The total cost of training bus drivers over the last 5 years is £41,332. In 2017, 16 drivers were trained. In 2018, 15 drivers were trained. In 2019, it was 24 drivers. In 2020, it was 27 drivers. And in 2021, it was 19 drivers. And so far this year, it's been 7. Of a total of 108 drivers that have been trained over the last 5 years, a total of 29 have left bus vanning. 18 of these were casual drivers and 11 were permanent, leaving 79 of those still with us.
Supplementary question, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Is the training programme assessed externally in terms of the success? You've given us some data there that looks quite impressive. Is that kind of the standard that will be expected? And in terms of Treasury, is separate funding required, or is that done from the department's budget? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
I think the answer to both those questions, Mr. Speaker, is it's all done internally. Internal money and internal examiners.
Supplementary question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Minister what is the current annual training budget allocated for bus drivers and how that compares to the budget over each of the last 5 years? And obviously, if he doesn't have that information to hand, will he circulate it to honourable members?
Minister to reply.
I will have to circulate that, Mr Speaker. I don't have that.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the current staff shortages, is this operational training seen as kind of being key to the future? And in terms of the bus drivers that have decided not to stay with bus fanning, has there been communication with them recently in terms of are they available to work in the short term? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
As far as I know, approaches have been made to former drivers, Mr Speaker, and if the honourable member can just repeat the first question.
In terms of providing a solution to the current challenges, is that training programme seen as being key to get additional drivers in place?
Absolutely. Training is absolutely key, and we like to, I suppose, know that we've trained those drivers up and they're used to our machinery, not only the buses but the ticketing machines as well. So yes, absolutely.
Supplementary question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The bus van-in management keeps training and in fact everything else about HR very close to itself. Does the Minister agree with me it might be helpful to include bus van-in in wider Public Services Commission government processes?
Minister to reply.
Happy to have a conversation with the honourable member and expand on his thoughts there, Mr Speaker. I'm not sure exactly where he's going with that, but I'm happy to follow up with him afterwards.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With regard to the 29 drivers who didn't continue with bus fanning, were exit interviews carried out and were they recorded and considered to enable us to go forward more effectively? And if that was done, is there anything that came to light in terms of what could be done better to ensure that more of the drivers stayed with bus fanning? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
I'm happy to find out that information, Mr Speaker. I don't have it to hand.
Final supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Earlier in a helpful written answer, the Minister advised that the Isle of Man was pretty much the only place in Europe that didn't apply CPC training guidelines, which affects disability and equality, for instance. Will the Minister reconsider the application of CPC training in the approach inside bus van-in?
For the benefit of members, would you tell us what CPC is? I presume then the Minister will know what you're talking about, it's just the rest of us.
The standard driver CPC training courses which are provided online and it's standard practice, certified professional competence.
Thank you. Minister.
The answer to that is yes, Mr Speaker.
Thank you very much. Turn then to question 5. I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mrs Maltby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure whether a safe crossing point needs analysis has been undertaken at Meadow Campus Primary School, what the result was and whether it will be reviewed. Thank you.
For the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last year, following a request from the Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mrs Christian, an assessment of this area was undertaken and consideration given to the installation of a zebra crossing. And we're talking about the area around School Valley Gilt here, Mr Speaker. Although it was recognised that the proposal would have had a positive general impact on the environment, the impact on the community of this proposal was assessed as being limited at the time. It has also had a limited impact on delivering the objectives of the road safety strategy and the active travel strategy. The proposal would have cost in the region of £30,000 to implement, and an economic assessment determined that it did not make a good return on the investment in respect of road safety. The active travel officer has visited the school in order to try and continues to visit the school in order to try and reduce the number of children being dropped off by parents in cars outside the school and change the parking behaviours of parents and drivers, and that work will continue. I'm happy to say that I'm always willing to reconsider and have those decisions reviewed, and they do stay on the list. It's just a case of priorities, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mrs Christian.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate giving the update formally. I'm just would like just some little bit more of clarification on the active travel liaison officer, which you've just spoken about. You've said they've consulted in order to reduce the number of children being dropped off by parents at a school, Minister. I'm not really sure how you can do that. What are we going to do? Reduce the number of children at the school to do that? Could you just clarify what their intentions are. How are they expected to stop children from going to school and actually arriving at school? Is that what this is to happening? Are they producing them to asking them to park further down the road? Can you just explain that a little bit more? It just doesn't sound right. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
I think the honourable member, if that came out wrong, I apologise, but I think the honourable member knows that the active travel group actively work with the schools and the children and the parents to try and get children to walk or cycle to school rather than being driven to school. If I'm missing something, I apologise, but happy to take it up with the member outside.
Turn to questions. Sorry, Mrs. Maltby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The children of both St Thomas's School and School of Algiers play together, they work together, they spend a lot of time together. However, they arrive to school separately, thus increasing the amount of time that there is traffic on the road, and that, for me, increases the risk of a road traffic accident. Does the Minister believe that every child should have the option to safely walk to and from school, and that a safe crossing point is essential in enabling this to happen?
Minister to reply.
Yes, I do believe that every child and every person anywhere near the road should be able to do that in safety, and as I said, I'm more than happy to review this, Mr. Speaker. It is a case of there's a huge list. We get members writing to the department with similar requests to this right the way throughout the year, and it is a case of, as and when we have the meetings, we look at them and decide what's coming to the top of the list. But there is obviously a budget for all of these, but we will review it again. I'm happy to speak to the member.
Further supplementary, Mrs. Maltby.
In September 2018, when St Thomas's was co-located to School of Algiers, a need for a safe crossing point was identified, as a school crossing patroller was welcomed by the community. That didn't stay for very long, but it was a very welcome addition. Does the Minister feel satisfied that all options have been investigated, despite telling us £30,000 is too much money to spend and making sure that children are safe getting to school, which I find a little bit uncomfortable as a parent of 2 children who attend that school. But do you feel that they should just continue to run the gauntlet in order to attend school until funding is prioritised for Middle Crescent?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe all options were considered and have been considered and still will be considered at any time when asked to do so. The safety crossing patrol officer, I wasn't aware that it had been taken away from that. It hasn't been made aware of me. Happy to have a look at that again and discuss that with the powers that be that supply those people. But yes, I think it's, as I said, £30,000. It's just a case of finding that budget. There are other issues that come and we're asked to do and provide, so we will look at those. But we will happily look at that again and review that with the member.
Supplementary question, Mrs. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to invite the Minister to actually attend school in the next coming weeks, if he would please do so, and come and actually see the safety issues that we're discussing today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
More than happy to do that, Mr. Speaker. We've obviously got a couple of days this week before we break up half term and that, but if we don't do it before, we'll certainly do it straight after TT.
Final supplementary on this question, Mrs. Maltby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason I stand again is just to reiterate that I honestly do believe that School of Algiers Meadow Campus with St Thomas's is probably one of the only primary schools on the island that doesn't have a crossing point. I don't know that for sure. I haven't been around every single primary school, but we don't have a crossing patroller. We don't have a zebra crossing. We have no safe crossing points outside the school. So this isn't just about making a point for point's sake. This is actually highlighting that there is an issue there and it's not consistent across the whole of the island, and that's why I would like to bring it to your attention and really reassess your situation at the moment, please.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member and her colleague from South Douglas have done a good job in bringing this back to my attention, and I'm more than happy to talk to them over this and review it with them. Obviously on site, I've agreed to come down and visit on site with them, and I'll arrange to meet with them both there. Thank you.
We turn to question 6, calling the honourable member for Arbory School, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what the total cost of introducing the new housing management system, Civica, has been.
Calling the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By the word introducing, it is assumed that the honourable member is referring to that period of the project between the final user acceptance testing and going live, in which case there have been 3 payments made with a total cost of just under £100,000. In terms of overall cost, there has been no change since I answered the Honourable Member's question on the 1st of March 2022. That is, the total cost to date is £44,917.
Supplementary question, Mr Morris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. What is the total annual cost of the licences, maintenance and training to operate Civica? Will Civica use the same or less departmental staff to operate in December 2022 than the housing payment system required in December 2015? Really, any date before, any date after will work. To process DI housing rents. What are these numbers for future reference, please? Thank you.
Reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The annual cost of Civica is the support and maintenance agreement, which also provides access to the supplier's help desk as well as user forums, is £20,000 per annum, fixed for 7 years. The licence is included in the total cost of Civica, indicated in the main answer to the question. Initial training was provided on a train-the-trainer basis ahead of the Civica go-live date on the 20th of April 2021, a date that the member might remember when he was in the department. A number of key officers are now regarded as super users as they have the ability and the knowledge to train others, including anyone new to that platform. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. As part of the planning and the final implementation of the programme, were the actual wider costs considered in terms of the impact on those users who possibly didn't have bank accounts and had to look for alternative solutions to help them, such as dealing with them at Markwell House? Was there any additional cost considered in terms of that? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Reply.
Not as far as I'm aware, Mr Speaker, and any additional costs there would have been minimal and just as part of the day-to-day job within the division.
Question 7. Call on the Honourable Member for Arbory Castle, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for the Cabinet Office on how many occasions the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency has been asked for yellow card information for postcodes IM1 to IM9. Thank you.
The Cabinet Office to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Public Health does not request information on yellow card submissions by Isle of Man residents from the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA, the organisation that runs the yellow card scheme, on any medicine, vaccine or medical device. This is because at a data level, the information at a small population level is not of sufficient utility for generating a signal that there may be a link between the exposure and the symptom or possible side effects, and there would not therefore be any action that could be taken here in response to the data. Similarly, Public Health does not ask MHRA how many Isle of Man residents have submitted yellow card reports for any medicine, vaccine or medical device.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that over 1,000 people have completed the yellow cards, so it's starting to look like a significant number of people, have no questions been asked, has no data been pulled in by Public Health to actually look at whether there are any issues occurring in several concentrations, because 1,000 does appear to be quite a significant number. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister's reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm not quite sure of the reference to 1,000. But I would say that that it is the MHRA that handle the key findings, and their key findings and the monitoring approach are online at the government MHRA website, which is UK government MHRA website. And the yellow card side effect reporting system, it's observational, and anyone can report a suspected side effect, whether they're a health professional, patient or carer. And at an observational system, the reporting cannot indicate any evidence of causality, as in that case, whether it's a COVID-19 vaccine is directly linked to the reported side effect. The upshot is that the data and monitoring is held over there, and that is published, and the analysis and approach of that is online and available. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. 1,000 is referring to the number of people who actually completed the cards. In terms of that number, questions have been asked in terms of the general knowledge about the yellow card system. In terms of that, is it simply promoted during the administrative process, and in the medical setting prior to vaccination. Is there any other promotion of the yellow card system that takes place? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the information on the yellow card scheme is contained within the leaflet that is provided to patients on arrival at the vaccine hub, and it's also available online at the Isle of Man Government website and the guide to the COVID-19, for example, the spring booster, and it's also contained within the patient information leaflet given to each patient when they complete the consent form. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary on this one. Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that Public Health doesn't appear to be collecting any additional information from the data that's available, have the GPs been encouraged, has there been any relationship with the HSC in terms of what this could mean for the future impacts on the Isle of Man? Because if 1,000 people have completed the form, then potentially there could be some future consequences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that would be a matter for individuals if they wish to be contacting their GP, and obviously that is a matter for the healthcare service, rather than having a link between the MHRA and also public health. And I hope that answers the question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Into question 8, and I call on the Honourable Member for Arbory Assembly, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for the Cabinet Office how many Ukrainian children of school age have been granted leave to move to the island since the 24th of February 2022.
Call the Minister for the Cabinet Office to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his question. The Isle of Man Ukraine Family Scheme launched on the 7th of March and was followed by the Ukraine Sponsorship Scheme, which launched on the 18th of March 2022. Since their launch, the Isle of Man Immigration Service records indicate that 14 Ukrainian children aged between the ages of 5 and 16 have been granted leave to travel to the island.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that information. It's very useful and very encouraging. On how many occasions have officers from the Cabinet Office met with DESC to discuss the education support programmes for these young people? And have Social Security and public transport also put mechanisms in place to ensure these young people get the bus passes and the school meal cards ahead of their first day in school? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the liaison between desk officers and officers at Cabinet Office, that's been ongoing since the officer group was formed. So officers from desk have been fully involved with planning our response to the arrival of Ukrainian guests, and they attend the Ukraine Support Advisory Group. There's also information on the website too. To the second question, to do with social security and public transport, there is information provided for Ukrainian refugees and hosts that provides a range of useful contacts to access public services, including education. There are also contact details for the Ukrainian support team who can help guide people as to how to access support or help with any issues that would arise. So I'd probably take the opportunity once again to say these are all individual circumstances as people settle in. If there are any particular issues or help that people need, then in the first instance, please make that contact with Ukraine Support at gov.im, and there will be help available. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. At what stage are the English skills of these individuals assessed to enable a more effective integration into the island's education system? It's been suggested there's only one island school with a language unit able to support these children. How many of the current students, the 14, are actually in full-time education at the moment? Have they all been able to go into full-time education into our school system? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As indicated in the original answer, I can provide that the Immigration Service has recorded that 14 Ukrainian children have been granted leave to travel to the island, and as already indicated, there is no requirement for people to notify government that they have arrived on the island, although absolutely we encourage that does happen. In terms of the English skills and language unit, that's quite a detailed question, and it may be best to put that to the Minister for Education, Sports and Culture. If it's helpful, though, I can find out that information right to members, but I would probably emphasise again this will probably be dealt with on a more sort of one-to-one basis, rather than having dedicated language units in each school. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr Thomas.
Okay. If the Minister does choose to inquire of desk and to write to members, I suppose the very simple question is, does catchment area policy apply, or are there some primary schools and secondary schools that are better able to deal with our Ukrainian guests, and are people being pointed to those primary and secondary schools?
Minister, reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, I don't have that information here. You know, I imagine it would be something that would be absolutely under the consideration of desk officers, and hopefully that will be sufficient to answer for now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's really important that we actually get this right in terms of ensuring children have the opportunity to go to school. I'm aware of a situation already where home learning is actively being used, and we know from our previous experience with the lockdowns that once a child is in that environment, it has a major impact on them individually, but also their wider families. Can the Minister please provide the reassurance that we need that this will be looked at, and the ideal situation is to get these students into schools and into the normal social environment which they enjoy? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually didn't catch part of that. Was that about home learning?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, I agree, you know, with the honourable questioner's final point that you made there. It is really important to get people into schools and have that experience normalised. I'm not aware that there is any particular dedicated home learning provision for Ukrainian children. What I would say is that it's been the policy decision of the government to provide access to education. There is not therefore going to be sort of once somebody is taking advantage of that system and in the system, you know, I don't think there's going to be a major differentiation between that which is offered to Ukrainian children and that which is offered to children that are here on the Isle of Man. But I'm happy to try and provide any further clarification. I take the honourable questioner's point. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question 9. Call the Honourable Member for Arbory Assembly, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture what progress has been made with the purchase of the piece of land adjoining Arbory School.
Call the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to my answer at the February sitting of Tim Ward, in which I confirmed that a positive meeting had been held with the landowner's agent regarding the potential purchase of land adjacent to the school to enable off-road parking to be provided, I can confirm dialogue has continued with the landowner through the landowner's agent and government colleagues. Our estates director met with the government valuation officer on the 31st of March, and they discussed the proposals for the land and the landowner's valuations. Further to the meeting, the government valuation officer has visited the site and will be formally advising us shortly on the land valuations. Once the department has received the valuation advice, we will then consider the options available prior to deciding how to progress. I intend to ensure that positive progress is maintained and will update the member further when able.
Further supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you for that reassuring answer. We're both really keen to get something moved in this direction. It's a really important area for us. There was an issue quite recently, and three parents made me aware of it, in terms of an incident. It didn't turn out to have any major consequences, but the Minister needs to be aware that it is a dangerous environment, and hopefully this can be pushed and we can actually see something in the relatively near future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department is expecting a response this week from the government valuer, and I'd just encourage any reports of any incidents in the area, make sure they're reported accordingly to the Department of Infrastructure and Education.
Question, Mr. Glover.
My Lord, will the Minister just give an assurance to myself and my colleague from Arbory and Malou that once that has happened we can come up with some sort of timetable to put out into the public domain rather than talking in general terms about when this work is going to be made? And obviously I'm aware of the same incident that took place last week as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, once we've got the outcome from the government valuation and we've decided on the options to move forward, I'm happy to confirm what the programme from there on will be.
Question 10. I'm calling the Honourable Member for Arbory Malou, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture whether those who wish to undertake full-time higher education via distance learning are able to access the same level of student awards as those attending in person. Thank you.
Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A student who wishes to undertake full-time higher education via distance learning is able to access a fee grant up to £6,750. A loan facility and maintenance grant is not available with this scheme. A student who wishes to undertake full-time higher education attending UCM is also able to access a fee grant up to £6,750, but a maintenance grant also of up to £5,000. A loan facility is not available. A student who wishes to undertake full-time higher education at an off-island university is also able to access the £6,750 and a maintenance grant of up to £7,500 for UK universities and £8,000 if attending a university in London or abroad. A loan facility of up to £2,500 is also available. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. It's slightly disappointing the level of support. Following lockdown, more people have expressed a desire to become involved in distance learning. Is the department actively looking at this, and are they going to try and move this support mechanism forward? Is it something that the Minister recognises as being important and something that would enable local people to get that extra skill base that they would benefit from? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Obviously, student awards applications for the current year for September 22 are currently open, and obviously we can't make any amendments to the regulations for this year, but I can assure the Honourable Chamber that a wider review of the options is being considered in alignment with the Island Plan to support students, which includes studying via online learning. All changes are currently being evaluated and costed so that the Department can progress amendments which align with the government plans.
Question, Mrs Corlett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister said there that grants are available, and that is true actually, but income caps prevent young people from accessing the grants because the income caps are dependent on their parents' income, not their own. This is an issue that has been really under consideration for quite some time now, and is the Department any closer to resolving it?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and obviously it is something that I picked up as soon as I went into the department. It has been ongoing for probably far too long, and obviously we will be looking at those income caps at the same time as doing the review, and hopefully bring forward regulations that will be in place for the next academic year.
Question, Dr Hayward.
Thank you. Would the Minister concede that during the past couple of years, especially with COVID times, that the students who'd been approved for funding and got maintenance grants actually ended up living on the island and being taught remotely anyway? And in essence, there's no difference between the education that they received and the students who would have opted for a distance learning course, only they got their maintenance fees. And this is a completely unfair situation for those students who, for various reasons, can't leave the island. And actually, we're doing a disservice to our students who maybe are committed to staying on the island for family reasons or other things by not helping them further their education, and that's a valuable resource that we're missing out on.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I need to make it clear that the Student Awards Scheme is a totally separate one to the Distance Learning Grants Scheme, the VITAS scheme. They're two distinct differences, and that is one of the reasons why obviously there was consultation on the VITAS scheme last year. We are looking at all of that and trying to find a way forward that fits with the Island Plan to make sure lifelong learning is at the heart of the department's processes, and we are going to review that and bring it forward.
Question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When assessing this area, will the Minister really focus on the economic impact of retaining these students on island in terms of the work placement they do, in terms of their actual contribution to island society? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the Honourable Member for that question, and totally agree. We need to look at ways of retaining our own here so that they can continue on to further education. I'm happy to circulate an options map that the department has created and is now published with regards to pathways for all, and that includes staying on the island, and we also need to include employers and opportunities that people can get for training opportunities via employers.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. In terms of the refinement of the programme, one area which does come to light with several students is the way in which the payments are made. The students pay initially, and it's often over £6,000, and then they put in their receipt to the department, and they get the payment back several weeks later, which is a challenge. Is this something that could also be looked at, please? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And obviously the obvious reason why that has been put in place is to ensure completion of the course, but it is in the mix of what we're reviewing at the present time. Obviously the payment comes at the end of the course, but that is something we can certainly look at going forward.
Question 11. Call the Honourable Member for Arbory Castle, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure. Sorry. That's automatic. Whether any formal audit of the island's tourist infrastructure has been carried out by any government department or independent body since June 2019, and what preparations have been made to ensure the island looks its best for TT 2022?
I'm sure the Chief Minister will agree that 2 roles are more than enough. As Minister for Enterprise, I call on the Chief Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, no formal audit of the island's tourist infrastructure has been carried out by government since June 2019, and the infrastructure, as honourable members will know, is extremely diverse. However, departments have undertaken surveys and reviews which include elements of the tourist infrastructure. For example, in 2020, Visit Isle of Man commissioned a visitor product audit to identify visitor-related product development in the context of what attractions and activities exist on the island. Since 2018, the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture has run an annual outdoor visitor survey to seek the views of visitors to its hills, forests and glens. Feedback from the DEFA surveys has been used to prioritise access and infrastructure improvements at many of the 18 Manx National Glens and wider estates, equating to approximately £1.2 million of investment since 2019. In addition, a Visitor First working group has existed since 2019 to ensure the island delivers an exceptional experience for all our visitors. The group comprises government representatives and private company stakeholders and meets regularly to identify areas of improvement in visitor experience. Visit Isle of Man has also been conducting regular communications to encourage all stakeholders to get visitor ready. In terms of preparations for the TT, as detailed by the Department of Infrastructure, it has made a number of improvements to ports over the last 6 months. In addition, the DOI has carried out preparation work for the summer season to the Heritage Railways, the MER stops, the Snowfell Cafe and the TT Grandstand. The Visitor First group has been working with the DOI and the Welcome Centre to enhance the visitor welcome and is introducing a familiarisation programme to improve service levels across front of house teams in tourism and hospitality business. The group will also launch the Responsible Visitor Charter, which informs visitors how to help protect the island's unique environment during their visit. Creating an environment that exceeds our visitor demands is critical to the success of the Isle of Man as a premier visitor destination. The Visitor First initiative underpins all 7 action programmes within the recently launched Isle of Man Visitor Economy Strategy, Our Island, Our Future, and the group will continue to work to support and deliver a continuous programme of improvements for all our visitors.
So, from your question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr Speaker. In terms of the answer given, it was incredibly impressive. There's a real catalogue of examples of things being done, of people being involved in dreams being set in motion. The problem is when it comes down to reality, it's the small basic things that are really annoying a lot of people. And I think it's that question over, are things like how the island looks now simply seen as a low-level maintenance issue? And I think that's one basic thing that we need to really consider. Are those key areas now being downgraded and being ignored? So are we actually just seeing the way the island looks as a basic low-level maintenance issue? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Well, no, I think actually, Mr Speaker, this government has recognised that basic infrastructure and basic maintenance is fundamental to our success as an island. That's why the Department of Infrastructure has committed to firming up its plans and strategy with regards to roads and maintenance. I hope honourable members have had the chance to read the draft document in relation to maintenance of roads, and I know that the Minister will be visiting commissioners, for example, over the summer period, and indeed Tim will have the opportunity later this year to fully debate the department's plans and agree what the charter should look like and what the plans going forward should be for basic maintenance in terms of the prioritisation sat within the department's other commitments. So it's a very important matter. We're taking it seriously, and honourable members will have seen the first draft of the document, and I hope they're seeking to input back to the Minister at an early stage.
Supplementary question, Mrs Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd ask the Chief Minister, does he feel the Isle of Man is truly looking its best for TT 2022, despite all those preparations, the amount of commitment from various groups, all the preparations that have been made? Does he feel the Isle of Man is looking its best, particularly with regard to the promenade, the Laxey Wheel and other sites? Thank you.
Reply.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think if you take individual points in isolation, then I accept that there can be some criticism. But if you look across the piece, across the island, as I took the opportunity to do this morning as I drove in up through Tholter Will, across over the mountain, down into Douglas, I can tell you that I believe the island's in good shape. It's looking great. Our visitors are really going to come and have a fantastic experience. I know there's a great deal of anticipation out there for the start of TT 2022, that all the infrastructure is in place and is going up. The road signs are out. The hoardings are up. There's a sense of anticipation, and looking at the weather forecast, Mr Speaker, I can see the sun is also being lined up. And at my own personal forecast, Mr Speaker, I predict this is going to be a humdinger of a TT. So let's get behind it, and let's have a fabulous 2 weeks.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. We can already feel the excitement. In terms of making these dreams and all these policy areas actual and ready for 2023, I'm slightly concerned that 2022 won't be quite as good as the Chief Minister is hoping will be. I hope he's right on this. But ready for 2023, rather than go through all the formal plans and all these formal structures, can we be more free and more open and fast-tracking like we were with COVID in terms of that response? Can we ensure that things are actually done and people actually see the changes? I know the countryside's brilliant, but when we actually get into urban areas, go between the urban areas, it's not quite as good as we expect. You know, we are on the gem of God's earth, and at times we need to remind ourselves that we're here. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Chief Minister to reply.
I mean, it's not a dream, Mr Speaker. It's the reality is. I know sometimes it feels like we're in a dream. But the reality is we're all working hard to build a much better island for the future, and at times there are infrastructure issues and infrastructure upgrades needed. There are improvements needed. That's why we've set out in our island plan a clear programme of events that are needed or actions that are needed from departments, from the Department for Infrastructure. That's why we've got this maintenance charter which has recently been published. I think that's why we're pushing hard to deal with our brownfield sites. That's why later, before the summer recess, we'll have a proper chance to examine planning. There are so many fundamental issues. But yes, I fundamentally agree with the Honourable Member that getting the basics right, having our roads cleaned properly, the appropriate cutting and trimming of hedges and grass verges in the right places and in the appropriate manner, and ensuring the island is looking as smart as possible is appropriate. But I know that come Sunday, Mr Speaker, we will all be wishing and willing everybody participating and visiting our island the very best of times. And as I said, I know they're going to have a fantastic time on a beautiful island.
Here. Final supplementary, Mr Glover.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Minister agree with me that a good example of trying to get everything ready for the TT is the work that my Department of Infrastructure is doing, for example, on the Ferry Bridge, which is a key location, a tourism asset. There was a crash there only a week or two ago, over a week ago, and the repairs will be made by Friday. Let's get on and enjoy the TT with a sense of optimism.
Chief Minister to reply.
Indeed, I forgot the ferry bridge, but let's get it in. Let's say hello to the ferries, please. All our visitors, and indeed everybody on the island, please say hello to the ferries. And yes, I agree with the honourable member that there is often things to do, often last-minute issues, last-minute projects. I know, and I spoke to the DOI Minister this morning, that his teams, across the board, we're working as hard as possible and will be stretched, of course, to their maximum, indeed across all the public service. I just want to wish everybody involved, from the police to maintenance teams to those in the healthcare service, and indeed everybody who's organising events, the very best of luck come Sunday and the start of TT. I know they will be stretched. I know it takes a tremendous hard work. They go forward with my best wishes, and let's get behind them.
Question 12. Calling the Honourable Member for Arbory Castletown, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Member for the Communications and Utilities Regulatory Authority whether the option of a social tariff for internet access has been considered.
Calling the Member for the Communications and Utilities Regulatory Authority, Mr Corbett, to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The authority would be happy to investigate the introduction of a social tariff. However, this decision cannot be made by the authority in isolation. Such issues are a matter of public policy, and while the authority plays its part in implementing such policies, they must come from Tynwald or government. If affordability is a barrier to some people accessing the internet, there are further issues that must be considered, such as identifying the individuals who are finding internet access to be unaffordable and designing a suitable mechanism that best suits those individuals' needs. For this reason, social tariffs tend to be linked to the welfare system. Designing a suitable social tariff therefore requires a collaborative approach from multiple parties in order to draw on the relevant expertise from each, and is not something that the authority can or should do in isolation. Mr Speaker, it should be acknowledged upfront that social tariffs come at a cost, and there would have to be a decision made about who funds that cost. It must either be funded by industry, who would ultimately pass it to customers in one form or another, or by the taxpayer. It is therefore important to get it right, as a social tariff that is available to a very wide group of people would be costly and won't achieve its aims because it will simply result in some customers subsidising others. In the past, there have been discussions around the need for a social tariff for the Isle of Man, and the authority would commit to working with government in the development of a social tariff, if it was deemed to be appropriate public policy.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Member for Cura. In terms of the regulator's approach, you've said this needs to be set in motion by Tynwald, but in terms of the background research, in terms of concerns being raised, have you actually been made aware that there is a problem, that there are alternatives on the adjacent island, that solutions could be put in place? Is that something that has been discussed, or is it something that you're simply waiting for us to signal the next stage? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Member to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Firstly, Debt Services has not raised any concerns with the authority about communication charges and in any way contributing to individual debt, but the authority is always open to working with other departments. What's available on the adjacent isle? The authority does keep up to date on regulatory developments in other jurisdictions, and it's clear that there is no common approach. In the UK, there are tariffs in place. However, it should be noted that Ofcom has only recently, in 2020, been given specific powers under the Communications Act in 2003 to deal with social tariffs. There are no equivalent provisions on the Isle of Man. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Call on Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the member of the Regulatory Authority agree with me that social tariffs can actually be a very blunt tool? They only, particularly looking to the adjacent isle, in fact, they only tend to capture people on certain benefits and therefore actually create cliff edges, and they don't necessarily capture those who actually are most in need, which can sometimes be those outside the benefit system but actually still on low incomes.
Member to reply.
Mr Speaker, I couldn't agree with that comment more. Thank you.
Turn to question 13, calling the Honourable Member for Arbory Castletown, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what improvement work has been done in the last year or will be done before the summer on the strategic route between Castletown and Douglas.
Call the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the last year, the Department undertook significant works to the drainage system on Richmond Hill to improve safety by reducing the risk of flooding and surface water. Colas plan to undertake remedial repairs to the failed surface dressing on Richmond Hill later this summer. The Castletown-Douglas route has seen the Ballasalla bypass works progress with construction of the Dandara-funded northern roundabout due to finish in the next few months. Although the department has considered road improvement works in the Brown Cow to Ballalona Bridge area of Santon, it has been decided that these works will not be undertaken at this time. This decision has been taken following a briefing to Southern MHKs and members from the stakeholders who use that route. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. With regard to the changes in the upgrade to Brown Cow Hill, when will we receive that additional information, please? I'd like to thank the Minister for the improvements to Ferry Bridge. We were slightly concerned that wouldn't happen. That was a near miracle. Well done. In terms of completing that work, presumably it will receive a coat of paint. Could the other side of the bridge also be painted, please? I know it's rude to ask for more, but sometimes it's worth asking. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to the upgrades to the works down on the A5, I will make sure that all members, Southern members, are known of what's going on down there and when we plan to do that work. And I'm sure as soon as the mortar on the bridge is dried and everything is okay, then somebody will go down with a paintbrush and a can of paint and make sure that it looks as good as possible, as soon as possible.
Supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Reference was made to the roundabout in the initial answer. In terms of that roundabout, it is becoming quite an unattractive area. In terms of taking that forward, are there any plans, any artwork, there anything to kind of make a real statement that this is the Isle of Man and welcome to it and goodbye from the island? But also, in terms of that routeway, the mileage post that was improved, and it was a really tremendous thing that infrastructure did there. Yeah, really, really good. But in terms of the surroundings of it, it's now covered with cones and rubble. Can we get that final bit improved? Because it is a really potentially attractive environment and a really good access and exit point to the island. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you. I, like everybody else, and especially those people that live down south, will be delighted to see that roundabout finished as soon as possible, and we will push the Dandara to get that done as soon as possible. And as far as getting it tidied up, we will make sure that any unnecessary bollards or signage that doesn't need to be there during the TT period will be removed and just tidy that area up, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in our attempt to get the perfect route to the airport, one other thing would be really worth considering, and that's the vegetation that seems to be growing randomly along the roadside. Are there any plans to deal with this issue? It's also particularly troublesome opposite the new estate where the grass has been allowed to just grow freely, and you've got cones abandoned, you've got for sale signs. It just looks not as it should. Thank you, Minister.
Minister to reply.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, we will do our best to make it look as good as possible as soon as possible. I doubt in honourable members' eyes whether it will ever be perfect. It will. But I would also take this opportunity. The draft charter has been mentioned, but certainly any local authorities that would and can help to make their areas look much better for TT would be much appreciated.
Question 14. Again, calling the honourable member for Arbory School.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what mechanisms are in place to help owners of commercial vehicles who cannot get timely appointments for the annual assessment of their vehicles. Thank you.
The Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Waiting times for annual vehicle examinations and first registration inspections for older vehicles being imported into the island can vary throughout the year. Commercial operators and garages can book multiple vehicle examination slots up to 12 months in advance. Once booked, the slots can be used flexibly for any vehicle that operator chooses to bring in for examination. Many commercial operators and garages do this to ensure a quick examination slot. Each week, a few slots are kept available in case a taxi operator or a garage has an emergency, such as a taxi unexpectedly being taken off the road and a replacement vehicle is needed. Slots are allocated on a first-come, first-served basis. Finally, the bring and leave facility is made available. Commercial operators can leave a vehicle at the test centre for when a slot becomes unexpectedly available. For example, if a vehicle doesn't turn up for their pre-booked slot. Using the above approaches, commercial operators can plan for their own personal operational needs, and the efficiency of the test centre can be maximised. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. That information on booking ahead is tremendous. Currently, how long do commercial vehicle owners have to wait for a test? What's the targeted waiting time, and when does the Minister expect that to be in place again? Thank you very much.
Minister to reply.
I'm not sure exactly on the commercial vehicles what the waiting time is now, Mr Speaker. I did give an answer in another place fairly recently as to the waiting times with regards to vehicles. It has been delayed, certainly with the move of vehicle test centre, and also we've had staff shortages with people leaving, and we'll do our best to bring those times down. Again, we're into TT and it's a busy period of time, and we'll do our best as soon as we can to get those times brought down for testing.
Now, honourable members, that concludes the hour available for questions. Mrs Christian.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to move understanding order 3.5.12 that the time for oral questions be extended to permit the remaining questions to be answered at this sitting.
Mr Forster.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to second.
Put the question that the question time be extended to complete the question paper. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Turn to Mr Morehouse for further supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the previous answer, the Minister suggested that the staffing issues are still a concern. Has action been taken to overcome that concern, and what's the timetable for resolving it? But also in terms of the current situation, it's quite concerning that on the 8th of May, a constituent raised concerns with me that the next available test will be on the 14th of June. And the one after that was the 2nd of August. And he was given a list of 9 slots, and there were only 9 slots available in the next 100 days. It's really a concern that some commercial business having to wait a really considerable amount of time to get these advanced bookings. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Reply.
With regards to the staffing issue, Mr Speaker, that is an ongoing issue, and obviously when we appoint somebody, it takes a while. They may well have to give notice from their previous employment or whatever the case may be, but we are dealing with the staffing issues as fast as we can. With regards to the slots for getting vehicles tested, I'm more than happy to look into individual cases that people have got. But as I said, with commercial vehicles, you can literally book those in a year in advance. So if that's somebody new coming into that area, if you like, they might not have known that. But a lot of the businesses on the island do book their vehicles in a year in advance, so they know that they're not going to be off the road. Because some people have left it to 2 or 3 weeks beforehand getting them tested, and then found that there has actually been a delay. As I think in my answer previously, it was up to 6 weeks at one stage, and so they found that actually they couldn't get it back on the road for 2 or 3 weeks, so I had to do with that. We are doing our best, and I'm more than happy to talk to the member, or come and talk to us in the department. The member putting the question down last week, if he'd spoke to me last week, we could have maybe moved this on a week ago, but it just delays that a bit more, so please come and talk to me anytime you've got an issue.
Final supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. You're always very accessible, and yet, fortunately, in this case, the company was able to get a last-minute cancellation, so that issue has been resolved. But without the awareness that they could book so far in advance, there was that initial thought process of what do? We can't operate, do we bring in a vehicle from the UK? So I think what we've done today is really important in raising awareness that there are solutions, and that's really important. But just going forward, does the Minister actually see that everything will be back in place at a specific date? Is it later this month? Is it going to be later this summer? Is it going to be by Christmas? How long is it going to be until the vehicle testing centre is operating as he would expect? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As to when we're back working properly with a full complement of work staff, I obviously don't know that and can't give that promise. It depends on the staffing being fulfilled. And with regards to raising issues, if you've got constituents who've got a problem, come and ask them to come and talk to me. But the staff down at the vehicle testing centre are very helpful, and they will explain to people who are either bringing vehicles in, whether they be commercial or vehicles that need testing, just how long they need to get them through the test or what the process is. Please talk to the staff. That's what they're there for, to help. Thank you.
Question 15. Again, calling the Honourable Member for Arbory Castletown. Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what plans are in place to guarantee the availability of bus services for cruise ship passengers. Thank you.
All the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Mr Speaker, there is no guarantee in place that the Department will provide any bus services for cruise ship passengers. The Department for Enterprise has appointed a coordinator. The Department of Enterprise has appointed a coordinator to promote the island as a destination for cruise ships and deal with the logistics of their visits. The coordinator establishes what shore excursions are required, offers the work at first to tours and then to the Department as the operator of last resort to provide the rest.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Could you give us slightly more detail on the last part of the answer in terms of the preferred solution to providing the buses and coaches for the cruise ships, because there's perhaps something there I wasn't fully expecting. And in terms of the relationship with tours, has the Minister now had the opportunity to meet with them and talk with them and really come up with a possible solution how tours and bus funding can work together going forward? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, indeed. The Department for Enterprise appoints a coordinator to work between the cruise liners and then tours, coach operators, and then ourselves. Tours, I think, pick up about 65% of the business, and then we pick up the rest. And on occasions, we will work together. I spent an hour and a half yesterday with the Managing Director of Tours, Mr. Midgell, and we are working together, and I'm sure in the future we will have a much better working relationship than has been in the past. But it has been a good relationship in the past, but it will get even better, I'm sure. I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that positive talks yesterday. I think that's really important that we go forward together. In terms of the 4 cruise ships that will be arriving before the end of TT, given the challenges of staffing, when will the all-island review of the current services be available, and is this being prepared by the Director of Transport Services? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
With regards to the staffing, the coaches or buses for the, I think you said 4 cruise liners coming in.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which shipping liners they are, because some of them will not use tours for whatever reason. They choose not to, I'm told. But I don't know who they are, but we will work to that. And if we are asked to provide that service, we will do if we can. And as I said in an interview during the week, our first service is to provide the public service duty. Our regular service to get customers around the island, and we should make sure that's our first and foremost. That's what we should be doing. As regarding the bus review, that will start. We had a first discussion on it in the department the other week, and that will come out into the public domain after TT.
Final supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the timetable, does that expect to be updated ahead of TT, because there are usually refinements? And if there is any refinement, will it actually take into account the current issues in terms of staffing? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister for Infrastructure.
Apologies if I misunderstood the honourable member when you were talking about the bus review. I thought you meant the whole bus review, which I promise will happen this year. There will be a review of the service. There always is a review of the TT services, and that will be out in the next couple of days, as ever, just before. And it will take into account staffing levels as we see them at the moment, and what we can expect to provide.
Question 16, call the honourable member for Onchan, Mr. Colster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister for the Department of Infrastructure how many bus services have been cancelled on each day since Saturday, 14th of May 2022, and why and whether similar issues are affecting the trams and trains, and if he'll make a statement? Thank you.
Call the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Mr. Speaker, on Saturday the 14th of May 2022, 33 bus services out of 527 were cancelled. 47 out of 318 were cancelled on Sunday the 15th. 15 out of 596 were cancelled on Monday the 16th. 8 out of 591 were either part or totally cancelled on Tuesday the 17th. 7 out of 602 were cancelled on Wednesday the 18th. 7 out of 597 were either part or totally cancelled on the 19th. 8 out of 633 were either part or totally cancelled on Friday the 20th. 21 out of 504 on Saturday 21st, 39 out of 335 on the 22nd, and 5 were either part or totally cancelled on Monday the 23rd. At present, no cancellations are expected today. I haven't heard of anything in the last 20 minutes.
This morning. There was, yeah.
The department runs over 600 individual services. However, cancellations can occur where there are no drivers to drive their allocated duty. A duty can consist of several different routes, and several different duties can be split down to allow other staff members to pick up the services at risk. The cancellation of services is communicated via social media at the earliest opportunity, whilst coverage is ongoing with alternative travel options given where possible. Similar issues are not currently affecting the trams or the train, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr. Collister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a rough calculation, I make that about 130 routes that have, or services that have been cancelled. I know the Minister was on the Manx Radio the other day saying that he hoped that this would be resolved. To be perfectly honest, Mr. Speaker, if I want hope, I'll go to church. What I need from this Minister today is reassurance that we're not going to have thousands of visitors starting to descend on this island come this weekend and suddenly find that we've got a major issue of trying to move visitors around this island during the TT week period. Can I have reassurance of the Ministers that this will be dealt with and hopefully we'll have a full bus service for the full 2 weeks during TT?
Minister's reply.
Mr. Speaker, as I've just said, we can only provide what services we can with the drivers that we have at any one time. We will absolutely try to provide the services that we have gone out there. But I've just said in my last question, there will be the TT schedule which will come out shortly. And we will only put that out with the drivers that we think we can deliver that service for us. And we will use as many drivers as we have at our disposal, Mr. Speaker.
Question, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My concern is the rate of increase in terms of the number of cancellations. I asked a similar question a couple of weeks ago and there were 77 cancellations. We're now well over 100. That is a real concern. Hopefully the new timetable will help deal with that pressure. But the other concern is a lot of people who use the buses haven't got access to social media. So when a cancellation takes place, would it be possible to send a press release perhaps to the local radio station so they can put it out? I know one is particularly good at this, but it has annoyed several, should I say, older people who've contacted me recently about being left at the bus stop for quite a while. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department does endeavour, yes, it puts everything out on social media as soon as possible to let people know, but we do also send those press releases out to the media, to all the radio stations, and try and let people know as soon as possible that way as well.
Question, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister aware of disruption to the Village Connect service with pre-booked services not being honoured and a general lack of communication with phones not being answered and messages not responded to? I'm aware of a student having to get a neighbour to give them a last-minute lift for their GCSE because their pre-booked bus was put back and back until it was too late. Would the Minister agree that this service needs much improvement and would he look into it? Thank you very much.
Minister's reply.
I would agree with the Honourable Member, Mr. Speaker. I'm absolutely not aware of that situation has occurred. And obviously when people phone up to book a service and it gets put back and they either don't turn up or whatever, that's not what the service is about. So I'm happy to look into that and talk to the Honourable Member afterwards and get more details and find out why and where that went wrong exactly. Thank you.
Next supplementary question, Mr. Collister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in 2019, we welcomed 46,000 visitors to the Isle of Man TT. 14,747 of these travelled by air. I've given the information from the Minister this morning. I hope he understands the seriousness and the concern that I have in respect of our infrastructure. Can I ask the Minister if he's had any dialogue with the Council of Ministers and his own department, and do they have any contingency plan in place, especially at the weekend, if we have a serious issue where visitors are coming to the Isle of Man, waiting for buses at the airport and the ferry terminal, and there's no bus there to collect them? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Mr. Speaker, the contingency plan is if we haven't got the staff, obviously we can't drive the buses. But I will say that officers and the office staff down at Bus Van and down at Bank Circus, you know, having done a 5-day week, will also come out and drive, having done their week's duties in the office, and they will make themselves available. That said, the bus drivers also, if they are fit and able, you know, a lot of the drivers also will turn out, irrespective that they've got families and things. They know when it's crunch time, if they can, they will turn out to make this work, especially over TT. And I'm really hoping that's the case again this year. We have seen high levels of sickness and other issues recently, but as I said earlier in the week with Manx Radio in an interview, and I say it today, I hope that those sickness levels drop and we'll see nearly a full contingency. I don't expect everybody to be back with some of the injuries and sicknesses they've got, but we will do our very best that we can to provide the best service over the TT fortnight.
Supplementary question, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd say to the Minister, it seems to me from his figures that there are more cancellations at the weekends, yes, significantly. And is it a matter that the bus drivers are declining to do overtime as well as sickness levels, or do we simply not have enough? It's almost to me like there's a work to rule and they're just not turning out for the additional duties. And has he delved at all into why that would be? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We do have staff shortages, vacant jobs. I think it's either that's running at 9 or 10 and has done for a few weeks at the moment. We also have that sickness level, and we also have that, as I've said before, the staff are tired at the moment. They've been covering for COVID, but people have been off for COVID, and they are, absolutely tired. And it is their right at the moment to work to their contracts. And at the moment, if they don't want to work, some of them don't have to work, and they're finding that we'd rather have that time at home with their families. I am working with the staff and with the office staff at Circus Bank to try and resolve that and get as many drivers back as possible and have them available, not just for TT, but to get the service back to an acceptable standard. If we can't get it that, we'll have to cut the services to make sure that we can put on what we're putting on. We've got drivers for.
Services, 14,000 people around
there. Next supplementary question is in the hands of Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm slightly concerned on two levels here. The first one is the number of cancellations is really just the iceberg on top of the water. We've got all the management time that's been involved in actually keeping the buses going and all the officers' time and all the other things, which is a big concern. In terms of dealing with this situation, is it the case that Bus Vanning has employed several bus drivers from the UK, it's been alleged 6, and they're now coming to the island and they will help deal with this short-term issue? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what the situation is with regards to drivers in the UK. It has been mentioned, but I'm not aware that there actually any have been brought in to help out. And at the end of the day, if drivers have come across from the UK to drive and they've got the qualifications and they're allowed to drive, then if that's the way we have to fill those positions, then as with any other job or across government or in the private industry. But I'm not aware that we've had any UK drivers brought in at the moment.
Question, Mrs. Maltby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree with me? I think he would, because I think he just hinted to it, but a good bus service is not just for TT, it's for the whole year round. And are our drivers facing a serious burnout over TT? What provision is in place to reduce the impact on services after the TT fortnight when our bus service provides a vital lifeline for many of our residents?
Minister to reply.
Mr. Speaker, we will look at the level of drivers that we have available, but we are looking, we are constantly, and have been for some time now, somewhere between 9 and 12 drivers short, with people retiring or leaving for whatever reason, and we will look at the service that we have to provide, and we are reviewing that, and it may well be that after the TT period that we decide we haven't got those drivers and we go back to a lesser service, so we can make sure that we've got less routes, but we have the drivers to provide those routes for us.
Conscious of this issue is getting a good airing. I've got 3 left on my list and then we'll move on. Next is Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that he's satisfied personally as Minister that the sickness levels are higher than normal and that more people are retiring and leaving than normal, as he suggested? Secondly, can the Minister advise whether there's any possibility that the variation of the working agreements, for instance, putting in place 2 working agreements outside a collective bargaining, might be having an impact on this availability of drivers? And can the Minister also confirm that you can't be expected to work beyond your duties? You can't be expected to have additional duties, and is that part of the issue? And thirdly, can the Minister confirm then that drivers from the UK who are certified professionally competent as professional drivers can just come to the Isle of Man to work? Of course, Isle of Man drivers couldn't because we don't have CPC training.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Confirm the levels of sickness. They are and have been fairly level for the last few weeks, I would think, but it is high. It's down to various reasons, from stress to injuries and all sorts of things, but it is high, but we can do nothing about that. The expectation of drivers under their agreements whether to do overtime or not, that's up to them. It's a choice for everybody who works, whether they want to do overtime or not. And if they're feeling tired or burnt out, or they've got family things on, or they go on a holiday, they're entitled to do that. But at the end of the day, we will provide, as I keep saying, the service that we've got with the drivers that we have. With a variation of agreement, I'm not sure exactly where the member was going with that, but we do have 3 sets of terms and conditions amongst the drivers at the moment, which we are working with and have to work with at the moment until we can, I suppose, get everybody on the same T's and C's or learn to work with that, which we have been doing in the past. And with regards to the UK drivers, I'm not sure what the situation is with regards to the UK drivers at the moment.
Supplementary, Dr Hayward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Minister concede that in his review, one of the things that absolutely must be looked at here is whether a government department should be tendering against private companies for things that are outside of core services that we should be providing? And actually the focus needs to be on those core services that serve the island all year round. And it's not tendering for the Manx Youth Orchestra to be transported on a Saturday as additional services. There are private companies to do that, and it's not the place of government departments to be working against private industry.
Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, I have said that in another place in an interview, and I'm happy to say that again this morning. Our service, our job is to provide the core service to the public here on the island. If, as an add-on, we are asked to do something which nobody else can do, like I've said, tours get to do the cruise lines first, and we get the bits that are left over that they can't or won't do. And I take on board with regards to the Manx Youth Service and other services that we're doing now. And I said, and I gave my response to the Managing Director of Tours yesterday and said we will work on those situations and those contracts over the next year or so with them.
Final supplementary is in the hands of the original questioner, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do thank the Minister for all his answers this morning. It is a difficult situation, but I am seriously concerned when he says that they could potentially be looking at cutting further services, especially when we're about to welcome beyond 35,000 visitors to our island. Therefore, can I ask the Minister, can he seriously look at this, the whole situation of the bus the bus timetable for the next 3 weeks, in order to ensure that our visitors to our island have a successful bus timetable that they can use, especially during the TT period? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, as I think I've said before, and I'm happy to say again, the bus timetabling for the next 3 weeks and beyond for everybody is being looked at and will be looked at as and when is deemed necessary to provide the best service for locals and visitors.
Question 17. I call on the Honourable Member for Onchan, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Minister for Infrastructure how much of the Onchan 15-year roadmap 2018 to 2033 has been completed, and if he'll make a statement?
The Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
The 15-year roadmap sets out the vision and the outlined timescales for consideration. Ultimately, these are unfunded and are the Department and the Commissioner's aspirations rather than a funded programme of works. Delivery of schemes relies on either bids for funding or alignment with other areas such as our maintenance programme. The Department has undertaken works in Onchan, including resurfacing works in Wyburn Road, Victoria Avenue, traffic improvements and adjustments to Avondale Road timings since the roadmap was last reviewed. The Department has also undertaken design and feasibility work into the Douglas to Onchan cycle route, which incorporated several crossing points. On a positive note, I can confirm that improvements to the surface of Cackens Lane are planned for later in the year, when the Department will install a high-friction surface. This year, the Department will seek to revisit the roadmaps with local authorities and MHKs to refresh the aspirational intent and help guide the Department's thinking through this administration. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Question, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his reply. So based on that, Mr Speaker, out of the 19 projects that are down for a short term, which should be done within a 2-year period, only one has been completed. In respect of Cackens Lane, I do thank the Minister for his update on Cackens Lane, but I have an email back from last year, the year before and the year before that to say that Cackens Lane will be done before the winter period. Can the Minister give reassurance to this House that the work will be completed before the winter period? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wasn't aware, I haven't actually seen the documents, whether there's 19 projects on there. I'll take the Honourable Member's word for it. Obviously, and he said one's been completed, I'll check into that. I mean, he was obviously in the Department for the last couple of years, in the last House, and will have had input into that. So, but I will follow up with that, and I will also look at the emails that have been said that the jobs will be done. I'm not aware of those at all.
A supplementary question, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yes, I was in the Department, and every year I ask the same question. So now I'm out of the Department, I'm still asking the same questions. Can the Minister, when he's looking at the short-term projects, can he also look at the medium-term ones and the long-term projects as well? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Of course I will. I'm sure they'll be on the same page, Mr Speaker. I'm happy to have a look at them.
Question 18. Call on the Honourable Member for Aaron Michael, Mr Johnston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I ask the Minister for Infrastructure what effect the introduction of the Highway Maintenance Charter will have on highway maintenance.
Will the Infrastructure Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The draft charter sets out the current situation. It is, however, the starting point for a detailed consultation and engagement over the summer with key stakeholders, local authorities and obviously members of this House. Through this process, a new charter will be developed. Some of the key stakeholders are the local authorities who are currently responsible for the delivery of most of the road sweeping, hedge cutting, weeding, drainage, cleaning on the network. I hope that through engagement, new standards of performance can be identified and agreed with the key stakeholders. The Department needs to catch up with basic maintenance on the highway network, which has been underfunded, sidelined and cut back for some time. This would support our aims of our island plan, and this is where I believe our priorities should be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the Chief Minister's enthusiasm ringing in my ears, if I could ask that the forward talks about the Highway Maintenance Charter marks a political turning point where we start to recognise and value the importance of highway maintenance. As there's been previous plans in place, such as the Highway Asset Management Plan, which was a result of the 2017 National Infrastructure Strategy, what makes this charter different, and what will the public be able to see and understand about the government's future plans for highway maintenance from this charter?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question, because this is a living document, which probably most other ones have been as well, but it's one that I intend to go back every year and talk to the local authorities to see how and why it's not working, in which case, and I get and talk to local members and make sure that it does work. There's no point in having something that won't work for what has been said, and the Chief Minister showed his enthusiasm earlier about how our island should be looking and how we all hoped it would. And this isn't just about the DOI, it's not only about local authorities, but about everybody doing their part. But I will make sure that we and local authorities do their very best to make sure that the island looks its best all year round.
Further supplementary, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer. Ultimately, the public just want to see the roads and pavements fixed, and this, I think, feeds directly into what many of us heard on the doorstep during the election. Notwithstanding the real challenges brought about by COVID and the ongoing difficulty of skill shortages for the Department, does the Minister recognise the need to really tackle these issues, and that a charter for many people is about an understanding, even a timetable, of when the public can expect to see progress in their areas? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Completely agree with the honourable member who's just resumed his seat, Mr. Speaker. The charter is about how we're going to do it, who's going to do it, but there is also the list that won't be in that charter, if you like, but the list that goes alongside it, underneath it, of all those jobs that need doing. And we have those lists in the department, whether they be capital projects or minor projects or revenue projects. They're all there waiting to be done. The lists are huge, make no bones about it, and there's an awful lot of money to be spent on it, so it's a case of just using our budget and using it very wisely and doing the best jobs. But I'm looking forward to discussing with the member and local authorities over the summer.
Next supplementary question is in the hands of Mrs. Corwett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to ask the Minister, does his department actually have the resources to fulfil the promises in the Charter?
Minister to reply.
Mr. Speaker, it depends what those fulfilments are, but obviously we can go out to contract, which we do a lot of the time. We go out to private contractors to do the work, but it's making sure that what we say we're going to do in the year, we try and do. And obviously, whether it's whether it's capital programmes or the smaller programmes, we have to try and deliver on those. Through Treasury, we make agreements that they'll try and be done over a year or 2 year scheme project over time, and we'll continue to do that. Working with local authorities as well, but we will try and deliver what we're supposed to.
Supplementary question, Mrs. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are the lists that you've just spoken about, are they made public at all, or are they anywhere for members that we could reach those and see where certain jobs are on this list? It would be most helpful. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
I'm not sure those lists are public. They're in the department, and the honourable member knows, going back to a job fairly recently, she asked to be done, and I think when she asked where it was on the list, I think it was 600 and something. It was regarding potholes in her area. So the lists are huge, certainly on the minor schemes and the potholes and things, jobs to be done, but the lists are in the department.